Hello again, and welcome back to the lowland greenhouse here at Carlton Carnivores. Got another plant spotlight for you guys, and just like in our last video actually, this one is a miniaturized annual butterwort species, but from a different part of the world. This one is from what might be a lot more familiar backyard environments to a lot of the people who watch this. Pinguicula pumila, often referred to as the dwarf butterwort. And it is perhaps the smallest species in non-Mexican North America. These guys are actually related to the southeast temperate butterworts, so Primulifera, Planifolia, Lutea, Cerulea, and such that people might be familiar with from coastal North Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, the Gulf Coast, and so on. This species is found in much of the same areas from roughly around the Carolinas down through Florida and then across the Gulf over into Texas. And this variety here that I have is actually an accession that comes from a county in Texas. It's also reported occasionally from the Bahamas and might even possibly be present in Cuba. But it's a very, very small species, as you can see, unlike some of its relatives. Like I have some young Primulifera here that are still not fully grown. You can see they already dwarf this species, which is at flowering size. So very small plant. These guys, they only grow to about 1.5, maybe a really big 2 inches across, and form these mounds of ovular leaves. They curl down until they're flat against the soil. So in the wild, as soil builds up and such, they just kind of form one flat rosette across the top with incurved leaves, and of course the classic tiny butterwort tentacles sticking up off the leaves. In the video I'll attach, you'll see the tentacles actually kind of sticking out from the leaves. They don't move like sundew tentacles do, but they're just enough to capture prey and stick it against the leaf so that it can dimple in and digest the insect or pollen or whatever else might have landed on there. So these guys get only 1.5 inches or so across, and they live in a lot of places that, unlike other butterworts might actually dry out during certain times of the year. So these are actually effective to obligate annual in their habits. They don't grow perennially like all of their relatives do. They generally tend to be annuals and often force that tendency in cultivation as well. So once they do reach flowering size, though, once they're fully mature, they will start to bloom and often bloom themselves to death. They form a flower stalk that is roughly 2 to maybe up to 4 inches tall, and on the end of that, the flower stalk itself, of course, is covered in glands, and so are the calyces surrounding the bud. But then the bud opens up into approximately a 1/2 inch wide, beautiful little flower with 5 evenly shaped, evenly spaced petals around the mouth. And then a short, very curved corolla tube and a tiny little flat spur that sticks out the bottom. Now this species is kind of interesting because unlike most of its relatives, it's actually quite variable in flower color. The version that I have here is kind of this lovely pale lavender color, and the lavender actually gets stronger as this flower ages, which is kind of different from a lot of other butterworts, including other forms of this species. And it's got these purplish stripes on the tube, and then the corolla spur, the nectar spur, is yellowish. Other forms of this species may actually produce flowers that are rich, deep purple, or have kind of bicolor looks. They might have a very purple corolla tube and white petals, or it might be entirely white with kind of a yellow palette in the middle. Or there are some forms, very rare forms, where, like its relative Lutea, they actually produce yellow flowers. So quite a few different forms, not entirely sure what caused that, whether it's just freak mutations, if it's actually possible for these guys to hybridize with the other species, although hybrids have never been possible with the other species generally before, so It's likely just a mutation within these guys. It could be pollinator preference and selection that's going on, but a lot of those different color forms in certain populations can be found intermixed within the same population of plants. But these guys, once they flower, they attract very small pollinating insects like bees or flies that get into that corolla tube. They get in behind the little flap that is the stigma, kind of in the center of that tube. And then as they back out, they brush against the anthers that are behind that and get pollen on their backs, fly off to the next flower, and as they're brushing inwards, they brush against that stigma and deposit all that pollen, and then repeat the process. Now, in cultivation, oftentimes, unless you're growing these outdoors, there are not insects to come by and pollinate the flowers for you, so you do have to do it yourself. And with these guys, it can be a little bit delicate. They do self-pollinate, and in fact, most of their relatives do as well, although it's sometimes a little difficult to get it just right. These guys, all you need to do is get a toothpick in there, scrape some of that pollen off, and then put it on the stigma. A lot of people will find it's easier if you actually rip the flower open in half to do so. I'm usually able to just slide a toothpick in there, wiggle it around, and then bring it back, and then tap it against that stigma. As long as you do that, though, the flower becomes pollinated. It forms a little tiny spherical pod that breaks open and releases all of its tiny little brown seeds. Those get spread by wind and water in nature, sometimes picked up on the feet of animals and transported around, and will usually germinate pretty readily, pretty soon, if the conditions are moist and right. If they are flowering right before the dry season hits, then the seeds will simply sit on the soil for a couple of months until the next rainstorm comes through, waters them in, and starts the germination process again. So in that way, these guys they're able to survive somewhat longer term in permanently moist environments, or they can survive as annuals in seasonally dry environments or seasonally frost environments, because these guys are not frost hardy like their relatives are, just slightly. So in cultivation, it's actually a pretty easy species to grow once you can get a hold of it. There seems to be a relatively low number of places that actually regularly offer this species. As I am videoing this, though, I actually have this species available in my shop. But if you can find, usually it's seeds that you will find, because that's the easiest. They will transport as plants as well if you can get a good enough colony going that you can sell plants. But seeds are a lot safer and easier to transport. They last a lot longer, and they can be stored for a couple of years at least. And those simply get sown on a nice, wet, carnivorous plant suitable soil. With my plants, it's usually like a 1-to-1-to-1 peat, perlite, and blasting abrasive or sand mix. Make sure it's quartz sand if you're using that, though, so that it's appropriate and neutral for the plants, doesn't have anything carried along with it. Low nutrient soil, very acidic, very moist. The seedlings will sprout up, and they start out incredibly tiny, just like the seeds are. And if you can feed those tiny seedlings without getting anything onto the soil, that's best, because they do require a lot of food to grow and grow quickly. Once they grow up, of course, you want to keep feeding them as long as you have them around, and feed them fairly regularly, because, again, as annuals, and just like many other annual carnivores, they do need regular feed to not only get up to size, but then to flower and set seeds appropriately. And you definitely want to get seeds set, because, again, even though in cultivation at least you can probably keep these guys around for maybe a couple of years, they will eventually just kind of exhaust themselves and die off, and you'll need seeds to restart the colony again. So it's always best to get a few seeds where you can. Feed them really heavily, especially when they're flowering, so that they will set that, and then you're ready for the next generation. Again, these are not frost-tolerant plants, so if you have them outdoors, they will often die off as soon as hard freezes hit. Indoors, of course, you don't really have to worry about that. But they will also grow best in very warm and fairly humid conditions. So temperatures above 70 degrees most of the time, so 70 to 95 degrees they'll tolerate even. Hotter conditions, of course, you want to keep them slightly shadier. Moderate 75 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, though. Grow them in extremely bright light, equivalent as close as you can to full sun, because these guys do grow out in those open grassland savanna environments in the wild, so they expect that. The only shade they really get is from local grasses at most, maybe, and they'll often grow open on like sand flats and such. So bright light, warm temperatures, and at least moderately decent humidity is usually best for these guys because they do have quite delicate leaves. Now, the fact that they're down close to the soil and they really don't get more than like a ½ inch, maybe an inch once they're bunched up like this one is above the soil, they kind of have their own little humidity bubble there right against the soil surface, that little microclimate. But if you keep the humidity above 40–50% in general, that will also help them. It'll help keep the flower stalks happy once those develop as well. But again, as long as you feed them well, give them good moist soil, a pretty easy species to grow from seeds and keep around as long as you keep pollinating it and getting new seeds. So that is about all that I have for this species, though. If you have any questions, things that you'd like to know that I might have missed about these guys, certainly leave them in the comments below the video here. And if you enjoy watching educational materials like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Turn on that black bell so you don't miss anything that's coming up. Leave a like, share if you want other people to learn about this information, and all this attention really does help the channel grow. It helps support me as well. If you'd like to find out more information, I do post photos and videos and such on social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at Carlton Carnivores. I have the database and blog on my website at carltoncarnivores.com. There's information there you can gain from. If you'd like to help support the production of materials like this, again, giving attention to the channel is a huge support in and of its own right, but also, as mentioned earlier, I have things like seeds of this species available in the shop right now. I sell live plants of all various kinds as well on the shop, or you can also get merch. You can also join to donate as a supporter at Patreon. Members there get access to the monthly seed contests that I do, as well as a few other bonus kickbacks. You can also donate at Ko-fi or simply contact me for other ways. Links for all these things, of course, will be in the video description below. But until next time, I'm Hawken Carlton, and this is Carlton Carnivores.